Equality matters of race for this theme of Patriot Week. It is a very fundamental question of history. The human race has been plagued by matters of race ever since we started walking on this earth. Now, what is race? What is the definition? And can it be overcome? We're going to start very far at the beginning. Past civilizations were bent upon conquest and expansion for resources and wealth. Now, in the pursuit of that, groups of peoples would encounter others. And usually at the outset, when we were just simply wanderers and gatherers of our food, during good times, we would help each other. We would usually trade ideas, different tools that had been discovered and mastered, and we would eventually part ways and go off, and we would form other tribes and continue on the process. During bad times, it would be slightly less pleasant. They would be fighting, and they would be trying to conserve their resources. They would be saying, wait, you can't come over here. We're already having enough time trying to find food. No, you can't be over here. And they would fight. Usually starting off with stone tools, spears and arrows, and gradually increasing the implements of war. As we started progressing, we started increasing our technology, coming together in larger populations. We started to build cities. We started creating religions. And then the issue of race started appearing. Now, race originally started out as you're from this city, or you're from this tribe of people over here that are concentrated, by saying, this valley. It was never about skin color, and it was never really about religion. It was just simply your nationality, your area of origin. And when people started expanding into populations, people were confronted with one of two options to deal with race or different peoples. First one was to exterminate the competing peoples in favor of pacification. The competing population is just simply too large. You can't deal with them. You can't govern with them. They'll eventually rise up at some point if they weren't already rebelling at the moment. So you just simply wholesale extermination. This can be seen when Joshua and the Israelites came out of their 40-year-long trek through the deserts, starting with Jericho. They eliminated the Canaanites from the Promised Land. There were just simply too many of them, and they were far too powerful to deal with as a pacified group of people. Option two is to assimilate the population. If you were of large enough size, and you had enough power, and you had enough resources to your own, you could just simply say, look, your lifestyle really isn't that good. We've got better farming implementations. We've got a better economy. We've got more animals domesticated. And we can help you. We can share some technology with you or ingenuity in how to better raise your crops. So you expand your harvest. And if you were successful in your arguments, and of course if you had enough swords, the conquered peoples would go, okay, you guys seem to have this down pat. You seem to know exactly what you're doing. We'll play along. The first example I want to give is Assyria and Judea, also known as the Kingdom of Israel. Assyria was a great big empire and it conquered the Middle East. They were a fully militarized society. Almost everybody was geared towards war. And they had conquered so many different city-states to build up their economy. Nineveh, Babylon, all the ancient cities that you would know from the study of the Bible. And then they started moving up into Palestine and the current state of Syria, known as Judea back in those times. They encountered the Jews. They were disunified at this time. They were coming out of their golden age when King David and King Solomon had joined them together. They were divided into 12 tribes, the largest being, of course, the Kingdom of Judah, the tribe of Judah. The Assyrians came in and said, okay, we'll beat you in a battle. Boom, we win. Now, let's play nice. The Jews didn't do that, however. They didn't do what they did over in Mesopotamia. They fight a battle and they say, okay, you win. We'll give up. We're part of you now. The Jews kept fighting because of their division. Now, unfortunately for the Assyrians, they didn't know this. And instead of going for pacification, like they had done over in Mesopotamia, the land betwixt the rivers, they decided to say, all right, you're not going to play nice, so we're going to get rid of all of you. The Kingdom of Israel, of course, established by King David. There's only one tribe that survives the genocide that follows, and that is the tribe of Judah. They were only able to survive due to one thing, Egypt. Former enemy of the Israelites now turns into their ally. They give them the tools necessary to survive, the weapons, and they even gave them grain, which Egypt was very well known for. This is the time of King David. They own all of this in blue. The Assyrians come out of the north, they crush the Arameans, exterminate them, and then they encounter the kingdom of Israel. And the last battle they fight is down here at Kadesh, the battle of 12 armies, the 12 nations of this area finally come together and battle the Assyrians. They unfortunately lose, and the Assyrians go through and conquer parts of Egypt, but they're still fighting Judah. They're still fighting this one tribe, and today the descendants of that tribe now live in Israel today. Now on to assimilation. The best and the most masterful of all would be the Roman Empire. They managed to get this down pat. They learned from the Etruscans, they learned from the Greeks, and they said, all right, there are some aspects of your civilization that are good, like the arch. Okay, we can build really, really beautiful buildings like the Colosseum with this arch concept. We'll take that. Military, economics, didn't matter. They accepted the best and they discarded the rest. They allowed surrendered peoples to keep their culture. They allowed peoples to keep their original religions. They didn't mess with them. They said, so long as you play nice and you're a part of the empire, we don't care what you worship. We don't care what you do with your own lives. And eventually, most of the original cultures disappeared. They said to the Romans, you know what, you guys are really, really good. We want to be Roman citizens. How do we do that? Well, all you have to do is just X, Y, and Z. And almost every single one of the elites of the peoples they conquered, from Gaul to Spain to Egypt, they said, excellent. You're now part of the Roman Empire. Now you get to serve in our Senate. You actually get to sit in our greatest house, the Curia. This is the Curia Julia. This is the original. This still exists. This is where the Roman Senate actually met constantly, all the time. No, Caesar was not killed in that one. He was killed in the theater.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's pretty little.
Yeah, it is. It's very small. It was actually what the Romans wanted, actually, at the beginning. They wanted a limited form of government because the Etruscan kings kept on molesting the peoples. They kept on coming in and saying, you need to do this. And the Romans said, no, leave us alone. This is what we agreed upon. And so they finally threw off the last of their 7 kings and they established a representative democracy with the Senate. And to, unfortunately, be a part of the Senate, you had to own land. Owning land was the way you could vote, was to participate in government and actually accept government offices. Now later on during the Roman period, the plebeians, the common people, formed the plebeian council, or the assembly. And they had the ability to influence the Senate, but they really had no legislative power. They couldn't say, well, we want this law passed and we're going to rubber stamp it. The Senate had final authority. But one thing is to be noted, not a single Roman emperor ever dissolved the Senate. So embedded was the idea of the Senate in the Roman Constitution and in the framework of the Roman mind that they just said, no, we can't get rid of this. The people will rise up and kill us if we do. So nobody ever managed to do this. This lasted for thousands of years. And it's to their credit that they managed to make this work. The Roman Republic, before it became an empire, lasted 500 years. We're only about 200 years. So they're very, very, very good at this. As for slavery, slavery in the Roman Empire was everywhere. 1 in 4 people within the city of Rome itself was a slave. The other 2 were poor, and the 4th was just rich beyond the dreams of avarice. They had massive latifundia plantations, enormous amounts of wealth, big houses, villas where they could escape from the pollution and the dirt of the city. Slaves, they weren't subjugated by skin color. Usually slaves came from conquest of war. We need more slaves. Our economy is going down. Well, let's go off and let's conquer somebody. That was the Roman idea. They were very militaristic-minded people. They would go to Greece, they would go to Gaul, and they would say, 100,000 people here, you're coming back to Rome in slaves and in chains. Also by client states. The client state would look at Rome and say, ooh, you're really big, you're very strong. I can't deal with you. I can't fight you. All right. How can we settle this peacefully? And Rome would sit down and they would write out a treaty. They would say, all right, you can keep your king, you can keep your councils, but you need to become a client state. Every year you're going to give us either an X amount of ton of treasure, gold, silver, or jewels, whatever your country can afford, or you give us slaves. 10,000 here, 20,000 here, and maybe some animals for our gladiatorial games. Something to, let us know that you still care and we don't have to come back and visit you. This persisted all the way throughout the Middle Ages. Even early Christians practiced this to some extent. They eventually managed to get rid of it only because of the fact that it became uneconomical to do so. As the empire fell apart, usually from within because they stopped expanding, it became too expensive to keep slaves. Everything around them was just too expensive to maintain. Farms became isolated communities. The framework just collapsed. Now on to America and race, the long evening struggle. When America started out, we did have slaves. This was left over by the Spanish and the Portuguese. Originally, the Spanish and the Portuguese had subjugated the Indians, and they used them as slaves to mine silver and emeralds and rubies in Central and South America. Silver from Mexico and emeralds from the Inca Empire of Peru, specifically also from Ecuador. Now, after a while, the American Indian population had been decimated, totally decimated by smallpox and diseases imported from Europe. And the Spanish and the Portuguese were looking around and saying, all right, I don't want to work in these mines. They're going to kill me. Who can we possibly find that's strong enough to go into the mines, but is also cheap enough in terms of food and won't rise up and resist us? And there was a Spanish priest who went over into Africa as a missionary and said, you know what, these guys are very strong peoples. They are very resistant to hard labor. They're still stuck in the Stone Age. They haven't progressed very far technologically or culturally. Let's bring them over. Unfortunately, the whole thing set up a massive slave trade, a massive triangle of trade. You would have ships coming down from Europe into Africa, picking up boatloads of slaves, taking them over to Brazil, to Mexico, and to the southern United States for tobacco. Not cotton originally, it was tobacco that was the big one. And then they would be loaded up with all the goods and the treasures of the New World, and they would sail back to Europe with all of their goods, unload them, and then repeat the process all over again. The Constitution came around in 1776. No, 1780s. That's the Declaration of Independence. And we inserted a 3/5 clause because most of the southern states said, we don't want any part of this if we can't count all of our slaves as part of our population. And the northern states are going, wait, you can't count these guys. You said they're property. They can't vote. They can't even do anything. And the southern states said, well, we don't care. And then the northern states said, well, let's count my horse. Well, let's count my desk. It's property, right? It can't vote, but at the same time, I still own it. We'll just count that. And the southern says, all right, let's figure out a way. Let's figure out a compromise. And the 3/5 compromise, which everybody seems to get up in arms about when talking about race in America, was not to say you're 3/5 of a man to an African American or black person. No, it was to say that 3/5, that's what you're going to be counted as to keep the southern states from filling the House of Representatives with pro-slave representatives and expanding slavery throughout the rest of the country as we grew. The party that did this was known as the Democrats. Yes, one of the original two parties that started. The other ones were the Federalists. And the Democrats actually came out of the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists, of course, collapsed after the Democrats won with Andrew Jackson, and they became the Whigs. The Whigs were too moderate, and then they collapsed, and then came in the Radical Republicans. In a meeting in Jackson, Michigan, under a tree. In fact, the meeting was so large that they couldn't hold it inside the hall. So they moved everything outside to under this great big tree, and they proclaimed the Republican Party, and the main thing that united all of these disparate Free Soil Party, the Radical Party, the Whigs that were left over, they said, what is the one issue that we can find, that we can say needs to be taken care of? And they said, slavery. All right, we are the party of abolitionists. We hate slavery. We're going to spend every waking ounce of energy we have in getting rid of it. Frederick Douglass, of course, as Michelle has already said, as part of Patriot Week of the theme of equality of race, he originally started out not liking the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. He didn't want much to do with the American government. He blamed a lot of America for the oppression of the African Americans. And then somebody stood up to him in one of his speeches across the country and said, well, have you actually read the Constitution, Mr. Douglass? I'm really interested to see what you think about all the other parts. And then Frederick Douglass actually looks at it and says, I actually haven't read it. And when he finally did, he changed his tune. He said, this document is absolutely fantastic. the three-fifths clause was saying that I am less of a man as a white man. It's just simply saying that the slaves can't fill the House of Reps and the government with pro-slavery people. This document is very tense. They're trying to get rid of slavery. It totally changed its tune right off the bat. Unfortunately, the Democrats wanted to expand slavery at all costs. They knew that if the three-fifths clause was going to stay, that slavery was eventually going to disappear. They did not want that. They wanted to expand it as far as possible. They managed to get into Texas, because it was already a slave state when it was admitted to the Union. And so now, Kansas. People think the war started with the firing on our Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. No. It started with Kansas. Oklahoma became a slave state very shortly after Texas was admitted to the Union. And the Southern Democrats, the pro-slave Democrats, wanted to expand slavery out west. And the next state on the list to be admitted to the Union was Kansas, which is just north of Oklahoma. It shares a big, long border. They had Oklahoma border raiders cross into the Kansas territory and try to vote slavery into becoming part of the Kansas Constitution as it was being admitted as a state. The original people who settled Kansas saw this coming and actually created a massive conflict. There were several dozen people that were killed as the pro-slavery people from Oklahoma tried to come in and influence their election. This was known as Bleeding Kansas. Now, with the advent of the Civil War, which I won't go into because everybody's heard it and learned about it in high school and probably college too, after the Civil War is done with the Emancipation Proclamation, now you've got something interesting going on in the South. You have all of these people from the North who had spent all about 2-3 decades trying to get rid of slavery, pro-abolitionists, and want to get rid of it, and now they've got nothing else to do except now you've got all these freedmen down in the South, these free African Americans they can't even read or write. Not even their own name. They are forbidden from learning anything. They're just kept as stupid as possible, basically treated as nothing more than animals. That way they don't rise up. And they have nowhere else to go because they can't function in modern society without at least the ability to read. And these Northern Republicans, these churchgoers, these priests, these reverends, they gather up members of their flock and they start going down south to see whether or not they can actually start improving the lives of the former slaves. They were called carpetbaggers. They were treated very badly when they arrived by the Democrats that were still left over from the Civil War. They would be beaten, they would be tarred and feathered. I don't think any of them have been lynched. I've not seen any documentation as to that evidence. Some people say there have, but until I see the evidence, I'm not going to go with that. Now, it's also something very interesting is that originally African Americans were just diehard Republicans. The freedmen became new black Republicans. In fact, our first African American senator came from Louisiana, a man by Huron Revels. And there were several representatives at the House of Reps in Washington that came from the South. They were also black. I think there were a group of 5 or 6. And later on, this started to grow. But unfortunately, you had Jim Crow and the rise of the Klan and the Southern Democrats. Once the Southern Democrats had, how shall we say, pacified the South to end Reconstruction and regain access to the United States government, they formed a massive block of solid Southern Democrats. And they instituted Jim Crow laws as they started retaking all the state legislatures back from the Southern Republicans. They started first with the ballots. They wanted to institute literacy tests. You can't read. Well, that doesn't mean anything. I want to vote. Well, I'm sorry, you can't vote. You can't pass this literacy test. And it could literally be anything. If you can't read this word, you cannot vote. Unfortunately, many of these freedmen, most of them, still don't know really much how to read or write. They know how to write their name by now. They know how to count. They know how to function in some way in modern society. Some of them own small businesses or running their own farms as sharecroppers. But for the most part, they really don't have an education. And this was used against them by the Southern Democrats. Now you're getting into the progressive era. This is starting, this is scary, with the rise of the eugenics movement. Progressive era started out decently enough. They wanted to take care of people. There were upper middle class, lower rich peoples who said, look, it's not poor people's fault that they're in the situation that they're in. Let's help them out. Unfortunately, this morphed. There's Hiram Revels, and there's Frederick